Welcome everybody. Very happy to have Victor Galaz here. We're going to talk about two of our three main concerns here. It's talking about AI and climate change, the good, the bad and the ugly. And Victor is associate professor at the Stockholm Resilience Center. You used to be the director of the Stockholm Resilience?
Deputy director.
Deputy director. Okay, I saw you as the director. And now you're running this, you're director for the governance and complexity at the Bayer Institute of Ecological Economics. You got your PhD in political science from University of Gothenburg in 2006 with a very nice entitled dissertation, Power in the Commons, the Politics of Water Management in Chile and Sweden. And you've been involved in a lot of things. You were editor-in-chief on current opinion on environmental sustainability, and you co-led the Lands Commission on Human Health and Climate Change, and you have published extensively on all of our climate problem and similar things. You actually wrote a nice paper with one of our researchers here, Andreas Duit, Governance and Complexity, Emerging Issues for Governance Theory. And then very recently you came out with the book Dark Machines, which we see, I think, the cover up there. And I guess today's talk will connect somewhat to that.
It will.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Gustav. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. So this talk is based on my book, but also based on other work and new work and future work. I have slides and I have sound. Let's see whether the sound works later. But let's dive immediately into the topic. So this is happening in the next weeks. I don't know how many of you know that. The COP30, international climate negotiations. We're likely to overshoot the 1.5 degree target. There are big tensions around finance, etc., etc. And whenever you are like in the tech AI space, people always ask you this: will AI help accelerate climate and sustainability action? And the way I look at this, I mean, people think about AI, whatever that is, as a technical issue. To me, is a deeply, deeply political issue. And there's no way you can understand whatever AI is and whatever AI does without thinking about politics. That to me is like the main, the basis for all my work. And it is kind of basic. If you go to the basics of how we define politics, who gets what, when, and how. In all the analysis of the impacts of AI in society in general, these issues pop up. These technologies redistribute opportunities, they redistribute risks, they redistribute resources, and in a sense are an extension of politics at its deepest level. So that to me is the take. When we talk about AI and climate change, it is through this lens. Just to begin, before I go into the good, the bad, and the ugly, my perspective on AI is not this. So this is a very common way to talk about artificial intelligence. I don't know how many of you remember this. This was a couple of years ago when AlphaGo, so the DeepMind system, won against the champion in the game of Go, right? So we think about artificial intelligence as something that achieves over capacities that are better than humans at very specific tasks, right? And that it's not wrong, but the way I think of it, coming from the climate scientist and working with people in ecology, etc., is this. So we live on this planet called planet Earth, and that planet has a biosphere. So the biosphere is the sum of all the world's ecosystems, including the climate system, the oceans, forests, mangroves, biodiversity, life in general. Without that biosphere, our planet would essentially just be a dead floating rock in space. So to me, this is essential. What we've come to realize, of course, is that on that biosphere, we built a huge, what people call the technosphere. That's the sum of all human technology and infrastructure. And that is not trivial, the size of that technosphere. So this is a paper from 2017 by Jan Salasevich, who actually try to calculate the weight of the technosphere on the planet. And they come up with this number, 30 trillion tons. That's a lot of zeros. That's a lot of zeros. In the press release, I found this fascinating. They took that weight and then they calculated that depending on the land surface on the planet. And in their calculation, they claim that 50 kilos for every square meter on planet Earth is technosphere to some extent.
Just a quick clarification. Why the weight?
Why the calculated weight?
Yeah, what's the point? I mean, we didn't really add any weight to the Earth, I guess.
That's true, but it's human made, right? And some people would say that the human made technologies and infrastructure we created outweighs biological mass and living mass. There are some calculations on that. But there's another claim in this, which I think is a little bit extreme, even though it is intriguing, is that a lot of what we now call the technosphere technologies are not just like dead mass. They communicate, right? They're sensors. The Internet of Things, they communicate with each other, which is quite stunning. And this is, of course, partly due through the infusion of artificial intelligence or a data-driven analysis of different sorts. So to me, there's no way you can talk about climate justice or climate transition or net zero or whatever without considering the technosphere and the influence of the technosphere. And in that, you will have data and data analysis, and therefore you will have AI. One process which I always mention in talks like this is from this remarkable paper from people here, the process of infusion, right? So suddenly some of the softwares and things that we use from one day to another just include AI, or in this particular case, I think it was deep learning, right? So you have very simple recommendation systems in digital platforms, and from one day to another, there's an update in the platform, whether it's Instagram, and then suddenly it becomes embedded with deep learning. And this happens all the time. I mean, I guess when this paper was published, this was sort of like a new interesting phenomena, but now it's like an everyday experience whenever you do something. Zoom meetings, note takers, transcriptions, summaries, iPhone updates, operating systems updates. It just happens. It becomes part of our infused economy. What I find interesting here, and there's a little bit of critique around this, is of course that this is part of models to extract labor from people, right? So this is an update, a new platform from Uber. I think it's just less than a month old. That allows Uber drivers to not waste their time waiting for the next person to drive. You can actually do micro tasks on your cell phone, like data labeling tasks, for example. So that's part of the critique, and I think I like this novel a lot, 24/7, by Jonathan Crary, which is extremely critical of the fact that the data economy is extracting labor 24/7, with the exception of human sleep. So that's the claim, right? So human sleep in this novel is the only place where we as humans can avoid being part of the data gathering, extractive activities of our modern economy. So in this particular book, sleep is a form of revolt, a beautiful way to revolt. But then, of course, we have this now, right? So just to tell you like how expansive the data economy and in that AI of different sorts is being infused. So to me, like when people normally think about AI, yeah, you can use AI to do this particular part, or it's better than humans to do this and that. It's just one part of it. And whenever someone asks me, how is this important for sustainability? I say, well, you need to think about AI and its impact. The impacts of artificial intelligence on sustainability will be very broad. Like basically all sectors of society will to some extent or are being infused with like AI analysis, like with whether it's energy production or transport, social media consumption, healthcare. We're seeing these technologies moving in, right? And then the difficult word, ubiquitous. So almost at point invisible infusion. I mean, some companies are very open about how they use. Now we use AI for this, right? But sometimes it just happens, like you don't even think about it, and everywhere. And then the last point, I'm not gonna talk about that too much, but I find that fascinating how these systems, AI, can shape our perceptions or our memories or our emotions. And I'm being a little bit vague now, but of course, if you think about social media and deep learning algorithms that define what you see, when you see it. And this is, again, the deep aspects of AI that I think are just, again, part of the digital economy. So for those who remember, probably not the young people here, the Facebook reaction buttons. Like at some point, there was a change in those buttons from, I think the old buttons were just like and comment, but at some point there was a rollout of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 emojis where you can react to what you see through some sort of emotion, different, more nuanced emotions. And of course, to us, that's kind of neat, right? Yeah, now I can say that I care about something for us as users. But this is part of emotion data gathering of users, which again becomes part of the digital economy. There were some experiments. I don't know whether I don't have Alexa myself, but like analyzing voice data not only through their information content, but also what emotions you sort of display when you speak, when you say something. Spotify at some point had emotion analysis of the music that you listen to, which was terrible. It was crappy, and I don't think it exists anymore in the same sense. And then facial recognition technologies. I'm not saying these technologies work well. I'm not saying that these models are like really good at predicting emotions. That's not my claim. My claim is that the emotional aspects of AI are just there, like collection of that data, analysis, contagion through digital social networks, and amplification through, for example, recommender systems. It's part of the economy. And as you know, and I know colleagues here are looking at it, this has connections to climate perceptions, climate norms, climate behavior in very complex ways, right? So there are several psychological mechanisms. I'm just listing a couple of them here, like affective forecasting. So people, out of fear of seeing something and seeing that I want to avoid harm in what I'm looking at, will change their behavior to avoid future harm, for example. Or temporal immediacy. So people, of course, react more strongly to something that is perceived as an immediate threat or an event. And of course, when you see things like this floating around in social media, that triggers that part of your behavior. But that's a separate talk. So going back to this simple terminology, the good, the bad, and ugly, when we talk about AI and climate change, and in that, of course, the politics embedded in it. The good. So what's the good of that? And I think I always go back to I don't know how many of you know Brian Arthur and his work. So he's a complexity economist, and he wrote this beautiful book called The Nature of Technology and How It Evolves. This is not a quote, but I think one of his main arguments is that what we've seen over time is that scientific advances drive new technologies. They create new technologies, whether it's let's say a microscope or satellite technologies, build in a sense on engineering, a combination with science. Once those technologies exist, they can drive new scientific innovations, right? So of course we will be making scientific breakthroughs using satellite data in ways that we couldn't do before. And part of an argument that follows up in a different piece is that he argues that we're moving into a similar type of scientific, technological advances driving scientific breakthroughs through what he mentions as algorithms, right? And I've been very sloppy when I talk about AI now. Like, what do you mean with AI? Is it deep learning, or is it ChatGPT, or is it random forest, etc.? We know it's like a whole universe of different techniques, right? And whenever people engage in the public engage with AI, they think about ChatGPT or Gemini. But the universe of methods is way, way bigger, of course. And I think this is what Brian Arthur was after, that suddenly these methods are allowing us to do things in size that we were not able to do before. That's his claim. And I think he's onto something quite important, especially in the climate space. So this is an interesting paper in Nature from 2019, which is a long time ago when you're in the AI space, like ages ago, from Marcus Reichstein. So his argument is quite basic, and he says, okay, so there are AI systems or AI methods that allows you to classify objects, which is very common. Like, okay, so what do you see in the image? Is it a cat? It's a cat and a dog, you can train a system to do it. What he argues is in this paper is that that's actually kind of a similar task as recognizing patterns in satellite images that allows you to see tornadoes in real time. Right? It's kind of like a similar type of task, and you can use that type of AI method to do this. Other type of methods, super resolution and fusion. So you have input data that is very coarse, not very fine-grained, and there are methods where you can downscale it. So he argues that you can use similar techniques to downscale global models, and this has been a huge challenge for climate scientists. We have remarkable global models, but they're so aggregated that when someone in a locality asks you, so how does it matter to me in my municipality, those models cannot do it because it's so coarse. So one suggestion here is to use these kind of techniques. And then video predictions. So if you have an AI system where you feed it, let's say 4 seconds of a video, and then that system tells you this is what is likely to happen in the next 4 seconds of that video. It has been suggested that you could use to do short-term forecasting of weather changes. And we've seen this. This is happening. So this was in 2019. Since then, we've seen a lot of this type of research happening, and some of these models are actually quite good, I would say. We compiled some of that in this report. I'm not going to talk about that very much in detail, where we go through analyze the advancement of different types of AI methods for sustainability science and climate research. You can download it here. I should say that this got funded partly from Google Foundation and DeepMind, Google DeepMind, just so you know, like full transparency here. But the ambition was to give a balanced view of what we're seeing in our research domain, like both opportunities, evidence, risks, and issues in that. So to give you 2 or 3 examples of things that people are doing now using AI methods related to climate change, and actually things that will help us adapt better and maybe respond better, a paper like this, right? So you use, in this particular case, deep learning to try to understand how many people are vulnerable to coastal flooding due to climate change. And that kind of the data you need to do that is extremely complicated. But it's not only about sea level rise or similar or extreme weather events. It's also topography, for example, and infrastructure. That requires a lot of very nuanced data that was missing. And through these methods, you can actually do better estimates. Similar things with extreme weather events. Without going too much in detail, another team used available open data and again deep learning to predict flood events in 8 countries, 7 days in advance, even in settings where you have limited data. Kind of interesting. And then, of course, now you have everyone talk about LLMs. So this is the old ELISA. You're familiar with that? So there's been interesting experiments on using large language models to discuss contentious issues. So in this science paper, the team used specially designed LLM to have conversations with people who were stuck in conspiracy theories, and actually managed them to get them out of some of these conspiracy theories, and that effect remained for a couple of months. Kind of a neat experiment. Another experiment where they used an LLM as a negotiator or moderator in conversations between people. And if I remember correctly, they even had a control group. So you had an LLM guiding moderated conversations, and in other groups you had a person. And in this particular study, the LLMs perform better than the human moderator. Kind of cool, I think. And then, of course, climate misinformation being a huge issue, particularly in these big commercial large language models. Some people have used LLMs to clean up misinformation in these commercial large LLMs models. Just to give you sort of the potential. My favorite example is this. Now we're going to see whether the sound works. So these are sperm whales, kaskelotvalar in Swedish. Their habitat is essentially all the world's oceans. So they move around the whole world's oceans. They are a species facing the risk of extinction. And there's something called bioacoustics. So meaning that you record the sounds of various species to figure out where they are and also how they communicate. And in this particular project, the SETI project, what you do, you have hydrophones. So this means you have microphones out in the ocean. Sometimes they're like floating, or you have them next to a ship, or you can actually place them on these huge mammals and then record their sound. So what this team did is to filter out. So you can imagine, like, if you make a recording out in the ocean, the amount of noise that you get. But of course, in this particular team, they used AI. I think it was deep learning also, to just listen to the communication. And the communication for this particular species happens through what's called codas. So these are small click sounds. And one of the things that they recorded is that actually different groups of sperm whales have different dialects. So the codas are different. So I'm just gonna, let's see whether the sound works, just to show you how this works, right? So the first sound will be the coda by whales off the coast of Dominica, and the other one will be on the coast of Martinique, right? Let's see. You hear the little click, Gustav? So they're like different click sounds, right? And then, of course, like, how do we know this is right? How do you know this is not an artifact of the algorithm, et cetera, et cetera? We can debate it, but there's a paper. You know, you look at the paper, and this is a field. Like bioacoustics and AI and measurements of biodiversity and understanding animal behavior is a field. I find this quite neat. Not to the bad. And I'm going to give you another sound to illustrate the bad. Let's see whether this works. Relaxing white noise. I don't know why you would do that, and you would do that for 75 minutes. So that's a data center. And these are noisy things, right? These are noisy things. And as we expand the use of artificial intelligence as a consumer product, not as a scientific tool, but as a consumer product, stuff that companies put in your laptop or in your cell phone or whatever, we're starting to see the impacts. When I began the writing of my book, this was not a thing. And like 5 years ago, this was not a thing. Like in the digital space, you did see like increased production of data and analysis of data without increased uses in carbon emission or electricity. That was not a thing. With generative AI, the picture changed completely. And I'm going to give you a few numbers, and many of you have probably seen them before, and these are all preliminary shaky numbers, just so you know. So for example, if you use ChatGPT or whatever to do a search compared to the old Google search, not the recent Google search, because that includes generative AI nowadays, that is estimated to be 10 times more energy consuming. Generating an image with ChatGPT, someone calculated, is as energy consuming as charging a smartphone, from 0 to 100%. And another estimate showed that 17 to 34 inferences, so like dialogues, interactions with ChatGPT, consumes around half a liter of water in Sweden. So this is a number for Sweden. And I'm going to go through what this means and a lot of uncertainties in this. There is a growing body of people looking into health impacts. The thing with data servers is that they use generators as backup energy, right? So whenever the normal grid is not able to provide the energy the data servers need, they have backup generators. They're either on gas or diesel, and these they pollute, and they pollute. There's a particular air pollutant particle called PM2.5, and what this team calculated, and there will be more papers along this road, but this is just a preprint, shows that the cost or the health burden of data server industry in the US because of this is around 10 to 20 billion per year, will be around 10 to 20 billion per year in 2028. Again, very preliminary number. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know, right? But there are things that we do know, which are very visible. So in this particular case, this shows, so the first of all, the climate plan of Microsoft, right? So Microsoft for a long time has been very vocal on their climate targets. Net zero has always been their mission, their goal for a long time by 2030. So that's the green line. With generative AI, that changes completely. So that target is still there. I mean, it depends on who you ask. I mean, they still publicly say that they're trying to reach that goal, but the reality is that carbon emissions of Microsoft, and this is, I'm not just pointing out Microsoft, it's the same for all other tech companies. The emissions are going up, not just also the American, the Chinese as well. So that's the reality, right? And this is just took this picture from Ketan Joshi, who's very public about this. So he went through the annual sustainability reports of these companies, and you see, so this is not emissions, this is electricity consumption from all these tech companies are growing. And the reason for this, and they're very open about it, is that they are in the race to create bigger models that more and more people use. And the cost is more electricity, more compute. Global trends, again, these are all numbers you can discuss, and they will be refined. The International Energy Agency would be the main energy agency to look for good numbers. But their estimate is that the use of electricity around the world for data centers could double to the year 2030 to 3%. So that's the size of Japan's electricity consumption. In the US, again, these are all numbers that change by the month almost. Estimate that the expansion of AI and use of AI will lead to an energy use of 6% to data servers by 2026. And there are different calculations for 2028, depending on what paper you look at and what method. So could be around 12% by 2028 or 10% by 2030. I think it was a paper that came out yesterday that updated these numbers. And then another estimate that if Canada built all these data center projects that they have approved, that will consume around 40% of the electricity needs of the country by 2030. And then you have loads of water consumption estimates. I'm not going to read you the number. I've said like several times now that these are all preliminary. And the reason for this is the confusion around what you are actually measuring and what companies are reporting on. So this floated around in media around a month ago. So Google says that actually a Google prompt uses 5 drops of water, minimum, like really small amounts of water. So that's what Google says. OpenAI had also like floating around some numbers, which is like really, really small, like roughly 1/15 of a teaspoon for some of these searches. And then what you would also hear is that the energy efficiency of these technologies is just like moving very rapidly up. Like the efficiency gains are massive. So what do we make of this? So again, like what's like the reporting from these companies? So OpenAI, Gemini, and Mistral, which I think is the French. It's the French, right? AI model, and how they report on their activities and on what they cost. So OpenAI, for example, that's the energy, 0.32 watt hours, and then Gemini 0.24. But then, of course, like for what? Like for what task is that energy use? So for OpenAI, it's an average query. And for Gemini, per median text prompt. And for Mistral, it's 1 page of text. There's no way you can compare these numbers. Like you don't know. They don't give you like how much is a median prompt. That's very unsure and unknown. And then you have the water consumption that also differs. In the Gemini case and the Google case, which is also neat, is that the emissions they give you are so-called market-based emissions. So just to try to simplify it, if you have a data server, that data server has emissions by the energy it consumes. In this particular case, when you have market-based emissions, you can buy renewable energy contracts from somewhere else and compensate for those emissions that are place-based. So that means that you can reduce your emissions in the way you report it. So that's like the reality scientists interested in this space are struggling with. There's limited data and not really comparable because you have so many different parts of what makes the supply chain of AI as well. Like where are resources being consumed? So first of all, in producing the hardware, right? So the hardware behind compute, whether it's microchips or the racks or whatever, consumes minerals, right? It consumes energy, consumes water. So that's one part of it. The other part is training these models, right? For that, you also need energy and water to cool the servers or to produce the energy. And that also has a footprint. In many cases, could be fossil fuels. And then the use of these models, like once the model is done and then rolled out, and you use it on your cell phone or your laptop, the individual use for you might be very small, right? So your interaction with this model might have a very small footprint. But the issue becomes when people use it 1 billion times in aggregate. Then it begins to add up. And the problem is, of course, that each company, from my experience, report on different things and different metrics. So that makes it challenging. So whenever you say, like, so how is this likely to change in the future? So this is from a report 2025, like, and again, for the US, there's a lot of US data, I should say, and that's simply because it's more easy to access that data. I don't have similar numbers for China or India or Brazil. Energy use, electricity, 4.4%, and then you see like a span like that. You know, how will this change? How will this move into the future? We really don't know. And there's so many ways that you can calculate it. So this is a paper from 2025 by Emmy Lewers, who, by the way, works for Microsoft. So you should know that, in Nature journals. And that the argument is the following, that we will see increased emissions from AI development and use in society, and those can be calculated. But these technologies will drive innovations in so many sectors. So it would lead to optimized electricity grids, novel materials, different type of replacements for animal protein to different types of protein, that the emission reductions will be way, way larger than the expansion of data servers for AI. That's the argument. And it's built also on an additional paper by Nicholas Stern, who some people of you might know who that is. Quite intriguing, of course, and a strong argument. This floating around in the debate for a long time. But then there's always like a but. COP30. This is one of the news items. So this is NVIDIA. So NVIDIA, just as an illustration, the CEO of NVIDIA traveled to Brazil ahead of COP30 to strike new deals with Brazilian oil giants for the use of AI to extract fossil fuels faster and cheaper. And this is not new, right? So we've seen many of these kind of deals, like whenever oil companies and AI companies shake hands, it's kind of like a match made in heaven, because oil companies have so much data that they want to analyze, and that's quite profitable if they get it right, like where exactly should you like look for oil or gas, and AI companies can do the compute. So the same for Shell and BP and ExxonMobil and Chevron have all for a long time collaborated with AI companies to speed up extraction of fossil fuels. And it gets really cynical at some point. I'm just going to give you an illustration. So this is from a blog post. This is called, some people call this enabled emissions. Enabled emissions. It gets really cynical at some point. So if you have the time, look up this blog post from a consultancy, AI consultancy, long article about how AI can unlock extra trillion barrels of oil. Like, what are the uses that you can do? How much can you speed it up? There's like a subtitle in the blog post called "What Can AI Bring to the Party?" and the party being the rapid extraction of fossil fuels. And then there's also like a recording of a seminar titled "Every Last Drop." So you should remember this because now we're in COP. Like, climate is going to be on the agenda, and staying as close as possible to 1.5 degree is on the agenda. And this is sort of like what we see the industry doing as well. And of course, many people here probably have heard about Jevons paradox, that when things become more efficient, we actually don't use less of it, we use more of it. So this again has been a debate for the AI community as well, because we do know that the energy intensity of for example, microchips and other compute has gone down explicitly. There are huge efficiency gains. And the same with AI, like the AI architecture or the AI models. This is data from Hugging Face that you can use an AI model that do the same task as another one, but that's 3,000 times more energy efficient. So there are huge efficiency gains as well to be done. So going back to the what's the net effect going to be? So this again, the Nick Stern paper on AI and the potential of AI. What they do in their analysis is just to look at the winds, climate winds. They explicitly do not look into enabled emissions or rebound effects or Gibbons paradox type of effects. So that means that, well, these numbers look neat, right? So the emissions from data centers will increase, but the winds will be huge. We don't know how big the enabled emissions will look like. We haven't calculated that. That's not part of the analysis for now. There's huge uncertainties for this. Like if you ask me, like, how is this likely to change in the future? I don't know. We don't know. First of all, the reporting standards, as I showed you, is just not there. Companies report in different ways, difficult to compare, etc. You have efficiency gains, etc., but then you also have rebound effects. We don't know how those will play out. And then there's a whole consumer case for AI. I don't know what you feel, but I don't know whether consumers, like everyday people, will continuously use more and more AI forever because it's so good. Maybe it just flattens out because it's not fun anymore or it's not robust enough. The same with industries. Like, is the industry really going to see return on investments on generative AI, for example? That's very debated, and people talk about a possible AI bubble, right? That actually these huge investments we've seen in AI will not pay out, and that means that the use will go down. Also likely. But it is very difficult to see how this will find. Someone made me aware of this article, 10 years old, where someone worried that since we're rolling out PCs, get ready for very rapid carbon emissions because people have personal computers. That of course did not happen. But there is in all these averages, and all uncertainties, we are seeing local impacts, and I think people should be very aware of that. So this is a very dark image, and that's intentional. So this is from a Navajo community in Arizona, who are already facing electricity poverty. And next to this community, you're building data servers that extract huge loads of electricity. And there's a lot of writing about this, that you can find this particular one from the Washington Post, where you see the strain, you see electricity bills going up for everyday consumers, and to some extent you saw coal power plants that were supposed to be shut down being revamped up again to secure electricity to data servers. So that's like the everyday reality of people, electricity, and then water. Water has become a huge thing. So there was this mapping done. I don't have the link now, but they just map the 2,500 data centers in the US geographically, and then they found that around 32% of them were located in high or extremely high water stressed areas. That's just the reality of those averages that we talk about, the local reality of that. And it's not only in the US. I'm going to skip that one because we're running out of time. What I'm thinking, and this is a message I always have when I talk to people of AI, because that we're trained to think about the cloud. Like that's always been the language of the digital. Like the cloud, you put it in the cloud, just put it in the cloud. To us, it's not like material, but it is very material. So the growth of AI, use of AI through data servers is not really a cloud, it's a mine. It uses resources, it uses labor, it uses water, it uses energy. Not to the last part, and this is the preliminary part, which I'm have not really done my solid research yet, but I find this intriguing and something to look at more closely. And that's the ugly part of AI. And that was partly triggered by this paper that I found fascinating about computer vision. So computer vision AI, you can do for so many things. like to design new protein structures, to create art, climate modeling, etc. And then in this year, a team of people looked into computer vision research and what kind of patents that research led to in the end. So they went through 19,000 papers and 23,000 patent filings. And what they saw then was that a majority of this research is being used for surveillance applications. And that increases over time since 2010. So of course, people say, yeah, but you can use AI for both good and bad. Yeah, but like what's the incentive structure and what kind of innovations are taking off and which others are just left to the side? I like this argument by Frank Pascal. Many of you probably know his work, that he talks about two different types of accountability. And I remember this, like the first wave of accountability discussion in the AI space was around responsible AI or ethical AI. How can we make these models more transparent, more accountable? How can we refine AI models to have less bias, etc.? And now we're moving into, that's his argument. A second wave of debate of accountability is like, what do we really need to build, and who has the right to decide which systems get to be built? So it's less about tweaking existing AI models, but more questioning what is being built and who is building that. So here's a third sound for the ugly side of AI from the White House.
Thanks for hosting us. I mean, this is quite a group to get together, and I think all of the companies here are making huge investments in the country.
How much are you spending, would you say, over the next few years?
Oh gosh, I think it's probably going to be something like, I don't know, at least $600 billion through 28 in the U.S. Yeah.
It's a lot.
No, it's significant.
And Tim, how much money will Apple be investing in the United States? Because I know it's a very lot, and it's, you were elsewhere, and now you're really coming home in a big way. How much money will you be investing?
$600 billion.
$600 billion. All right. It's a lot of jobs.
We're very proud to do it.
Yeah, that's a longer clip. I find that fascinating and so visual. So there's something around, so as you mentioned, like AI as a methodological tool, something that we can use in your toolbox to understand climate change, adapt to climate change, understand nature, etc. Then you have the material aspects of AI, and then the third aspect, like AI as a political actor. And here, of course, I mean AI companies, right? And it becomes so clear, especially in the US case. One illustration of that was, of course, when Bill Gates last week said that we should focus less on climate mitigation and more on other things that would be more important. That created huge waves, and it's kind of clear in the US. The question is, like, how do we analyze this, right? Like, what should we look for when we unpack AI as a political actor in climate policy? I'm just taking this very simple framework from Jennifer Clapp. So she looks into the food sector and the food industry. So she said what we're seeing companies in the food sector do, first of all, they shape material conditions. So what they do has an impact on the environment. The other aspect would be markets, shaping markets, and then the last part, shaping policy and governance. To me, this is helpful to just begin to structure the influence of AI companies on climate policy. So one is, if we talk about markets, there is a market, I wouldn't say it's big, for carbon removal technologies and carbon offsets. And that market is driven to a large extent, but not only, by tech companies like BECCS, so carbon capture and storage, for example, big investments in that. Direct air capture, so meaning that you suck out CO2 from the air, essentially. And then a little bit of reforestation type of projects or tree plantations. The tech sector has been quite prominent in this sector. Without looking too much into details, I would argue that they have essentially shaped and created these markets to some extent. Yeah, I'm going to wrap up soon. And you see this happening. This is a really contentious issue, I should say. There are two ways to look at it. One would be it's great that the tech sector voluntarily is creating these type of markets and technology that we need. We know that we will need, if we're going to overshoot over 1.5, which we will do. If we want to go below 1.5, we need to begin to remove CO2 somehow. It's just getting to net zero is not going to be enough. You need to remove CO2. So, well, awesome if private capital and tech companies join hands to create these markets. The negative aspect of this, some people say these markets are just crap. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. So this is super polarized. This, just to give you the size. So there's one site that collects information about carbon dioxide removal and the carbon dioxide removal market, and they have what they call the leaderboard of these markets and who's buying most of these products. And on top you have Microsoft, and then you have some other companies. You have Google and Amazon. So I think Microsoft by far is the largest player in this market. So that's the way you shape markets. And then of course the politics of this in the US with Trump is just fascinating to see this playing out so clearly, like the expansion of coal to secure AI dominance in the US. And that happens through different ways. I think part of the logic, and this is how I've seen this pop up in several debates, is that the biggest barrier for those who want to achieve AI dominance is energy. Not only expertise or microchip, it's going to be energy. And through that, of course, you have policies to expand that energy to secure AI dominance, in line what these big tech companies explicitly have been asking for, right? So build, baby, build. That's in the plan. So remove red tape and regulation, meaning don't have as strict environmental regulations, for example. Build out AI infrastructure and then use these technologies as a negotiation tool with other partners. Is this spilling over to the EU? That's, I think, is an interesting question to ask. We do know that the tech industry is moving and has moved quickly into very intense lobbying attempts at the EU level. We know that thanks to registers. Will this lead to a dismantling or erosion of environmental regulations? So that kind of like US big tech dominance. We don't know. Just to be honest, I mean, I can show you 30 op-eds about this and meetings, etc. But we don't really have like a good analytical and empirical overview of how this kind of influence happens. It's not going to be easy, of course. There's kind of an interesting work down here by colleagues who are getting to those kind of issues. Very quickly. Sorry, Gustav, I'm running over a little bit. Give me 2 more minutes. What are the sources of power? Just like from my experience working with this over many, many years, the tech sector was very quick to move into climate issues. I think they have a first mover advantage. The early papers 6, 7, 8 years ago setting the agenda for AI for climate and nature was from big tech. And that way you shape the narrative. Money. Now, these are huge companies, very powerful. 7 out of the 10 largest companies in the world, if you look into market cap, are big tech companies. And of course, through that, you can fund AI for climate programs and projects and researchers and conferences. Compute, of course, you have the capacities to actually do these analysis with big data. And expertise shouldn't be underestimated. People who know their stuff, who know how this works, who can crunch the data, do the analysis, go to big tech, because it's such it's the expertise and capacities you have there is just massive. So those would be the 3 phases of AI in my mind. So you have the possibilities to do very exciting and innovative science. There's also the material aspects of AI, growing carbon footprint, water use, minerals, pollution. And then you have the difficult one, the political aspect. And these are all related, of course. It's not like they're separate. Of course they connect. But what I note is that the debate and people are moving into what's measurable. There is so much discussion about the water energy footprint. People love that stuff. But the difficult things that are not as easy to measure, like the politics and lobbying and narrative domination, is really not part of the conversations in a very small group. So going back to this question, will AI help accelerate climate and sustainability action? Terrible question. That's a bad question. This is the question. Will AI, as it is currently being developed and deployed by big major tech companies and invested in and regulated in by the private and public sector, help accelerate climate and sustainability? That's how we should talk about AI and climate change. Thank you. Sorry for running over time.
Thank you very much. I'm sure it's going to be many questions, and as usual, we have an audience here and we have an audience online. So if you're here, raise your hand if you have a question, and you raise a finger for a follow-up. And if you're joining online, use the chat box, Zoom chat, to submit your question, but also include your name and area of study. So we like to find questions from different disciplines. And for follow-up questions, you online type follow-up to the person you're following up. And we will put you online when needed. So the question is, do we have any question? I can see we have quite a number of questions here. Felicia.
I was very interested in the end of the presentation. First, thank you very much for an interesting presentation overall. But if you could expand at all about, this kind of lobbying that the tech sector is doing. I understand it's very difficult to get insight, but do you have any thoughts or idea about how researchers could do research into these kind of difficult and dark rooms, if you have any methodological thoughts, or if there's anything that you have begun doing in this project to work on this?
To be honest, I just have very vague ideas, very, very vague ideas about how to get to this. I shouldn't say this has not been studied, because there are a lot of really good scholars who have looked into the politics of the AI industry. I can mention several names, but I think I haven't seen that properly done for the climate change space. I think you would look into what would be very tangible lobbying attempts at the EU level. That's where I would begin, because the registers and the meetings is kind of open. But I would also look into more the aspects of agenda setting and expertise. Like, how do we talk about AI and climate change? Who are the experts being invited to different committees or national commissions for AI strategy, etc.? Who are the funders of huge AI for Good conferences that we see annually? Who are the gold members? Who are the sponsors? What are the topics? I mean, that kind of, I think you need to do the mapping of not only tangible lobbying attempts for regulation, but also like setting the agenda and shaping debate and what's seen as valuable expertise and not. But those are very vague ideas at the moment.
Happy with that? Then we move on to Marcus, just in front of you.
Okay, thanks. This is very interesting. So there was, I guess, most of your focus was perhaps on the Western world or the US. And I was wondering about the other parts of the world. So there's this argument from big tech companies now that we need to make serious investments in the US, for instance, in order to promote a kind of democratic AI. So unless we reach these kinds of milestones first, then the technology might end up in autocratic regimes, or I guess China is the big specter here that they attempt to fearmonger about. So do you see a parallel argument when it comes to climate change? So like first at face value, and then you can say whether you think it's correct or not. Does it make sense to try and promote technological innovation in the US, for instance, or should we actually do the opposite and build data centers in China because of the major advancements in solar, for instance, that they're currently doing? So have you seen that kind of argument of trying to frame what is essentially political questions about investments in AI in terms of climate impact? And also, what do you think about it, if you've seen it?
Yeah, I think, I mean, what I see, and this is why I wanted to separate the three aspects, is that the intentional conflation of these and mix up of this. So just to be very explicit, so you have big tech companies, whether you talk about Microsoft or Amazon, that have investments in AI for good projects, climate projects. And then you say, look of all what the wonderful things you can do with AI, like in a very vaguely defined way. And therefore, we need to invest in AI, like in general, for everything. To me, those are two different things, because in the report that we did when we talk about sustainability, science, and climate, the kind of AI that scholars are using in collaboration with communities are not the closed, big commercial models. These are different ones. These are open, small, purpose-driven, non-commercial models. So you can do that without buying into huge AI investments in compute in general in society. So that to me are two different things that get mixed up. So I don't know whether that answers your question a little bit. So I see the argument. Invest in AI, do it, and if you do it, we will solve climate change at the same time, sort of type of argument. But that's not true. I think that's false. You don't need to do it. You can do it differently.
Happy with that?
Sure.
Then Benj.
Yeah, I thank you very much for this. To end, you sort of on this last slide, right? This question you would like us to focus on. I had a specific question about energy policy, and the way that these big tech companies, as I understand it, are actually doing a lot of like modeling and simulation of their own needs for power grids, right? So it's not just sort of using existing power grids, but actually sort of increasing capacities. And so it seems to me that there's a very clear kind of move to, as you say, set the agenda, but not be regulated as a public utility, right? And I'm sort of wondering, which energy industries do quite often, but I'm wondering if there's a way to understand this where, for example, not just coal, but the sort of increase of data centers sited next to nuclear power plants in the US that are essentially the same facility, but one is a private operator and one is an energy operator, and they're seen as sort of separate entities. So the question would be sort of how, like on a policy level, how do you see this developing, and what are the sort of places we should be looking for kind of energy policy? I mean, on the one hand, like, should these companies be involved in regulation of energy as a public utility, or do we understand this as just a sort of recent, like the latest kind of corporate actor to be sort of setting energy policy? Does that make sense?
I think so. I mean, essentially what we're seeing, I think you mentioned that in the beginning, is that since the grid is not managing to cope with the needs of this industry, the industry is going to figure out its own solution. Whether this means having diesel aggregators or rebuilt airplane engines, which I've seen also to power these data servers, or nuclear power, they will build that in parallel, right? The issue is, like, from a climate perspective, you want all industries to go towards net zero as quickly as possible. So that means that you need to have these industries reporting in a standardized way and having very clear targets that they follow, and that you sanction them on if they don't follow. So that would be, from a climate point of view, what you need. But I don't see policy moving that way. I think the policy at the moment is AI is the next competitive edge in our economies. We need to invest as much as possible, as quickly as possible, and that means allowing for whatever energy you can use as cheaply and fast as possible. So there's a big difference between how it will evolve versus what we need to see happening if you want to reach climate targets.
Happy with that?
Yes. I mean, not
I
a happy
follow.
situation, but yeah, thank you.
Sorry, my voice. Yeah, so the follow-up here, I wonder if you could perhaps clarify this for us who doesn't know. We have a lot of energy consumption, and we have this probably transformed into heat, I guess, mainly. And then you also talked about water consumption. I just first wondered what happens to the water. But secondly, you could use this, as we've been using in other industry, to heat water for people and stuff like that. And where did that come into your kind of good, bad, and ugly? I mean, that would be a kind of obvious way of trying to reducing this cost by using that heat and heating water.
I mean, let's take the water question first. Like, what happens to the water? Like, why do you need so much water?
I know why you need it, but I want to know what happens after.
With the water? I mean, if you use it for energy production, I would say the estimates show that 50, 60, 70% just evaporate and disappear, right? So it's not, you won't have it in the same locality as you would have. And similar for cooling, right? So it's not that it circulates and then comes back.
But that's what I
it moves away.
Because you can use it for heating up the
Yeah,
water
you
and
can.
send it out to people who want hot
You
water.
can. So that's the other part of the answer, is that there are many technological fixes in this, in a sense that you can minimize energy use, you can minimize water use. Huge things that you can do to create systems that are better adapted to what we need to have. The challenge here is the incentives to do that. I mean, you can think about it. I think a fair parallel would be the personal transport system. We know there are solutions to have better aligned instead of having each one of us having their own cars driven by fossil fuels, etc. There are technical solutions. The problem is, how do you make that transition to those new technologies?
Fine,
The incentives are not there for companies to do it.
That's why I want you to explain to me. Why not? Because you can make money of heating water.
Yeah, but they will require you to invest in new technologies, and maybe that's not possible everywhere, right?
No, not everywhere.
Yeah,
but I mean, I thought, are there some research on this? I mean, I felt a little bit.
The technical research there are.
Not the technical stuff. Is this being done? Is there an economic incentive to it? Has it been done in other industries that you spill water for heating people?
I haven't looked into that. I haven't seen that for the AI industry. I mean, what you see are rapid expansion of energy production, whatever energy you have available. Doesn't matter whether it's new or coal or diesel, just rapid expansion. Yeah.
Very well. Okay. So what do we have next? Oh, we're going back to your young days. Bo Rothstein. You're going to get a mic.
Thank you, Victor. This is fascinating. I have two unrelated questions, if I may.
Unrelated to talk or?
No, unrelated to each other. The first is, we are supposed to compare, to find comparable cases. And my question is, when the internet transformed into social media platforms, we were sort of told that this would increase and deepen our democracies. People could sort of communicate. They were not limited by op-ed editors to say what they wanted. In a recent analysis, Francis Fukuyama, when he tries to explain the rise of anti-democratic, conspiracy-oriented right-wing populism, social media is his thing. This is what. Will we see the same with this? Is there the same risk here? This is my first question. My second question relates to Paul Krugman, the economist, has a famous saying, productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it's almost everything. And Sweden, together with most European Western countries, productivity has gone down very much. 1992 to 2006, we had almost 3%, 2.7% productivity increase per year. Now, since then, we are down to 1%. And the prediction is that this low productivity will increase. Now, I don't have to tell you that with interest over interest, this is a phenomenal amount of money over time. Of course, it can be used to private consumption, but also for international aid or better services and so on. My big surprise is that why haven't this technological revolution increased our productivity? Why is it so low? and continues to be so low? I have no idea. I just wonder what you are thinking about it.
I think beginning with the last question, I think when it comes to productivity, I think the jury is still out on that question. I think that there are several studies that show limited productivity gains, that show that what you as individual gain in productivity, you're actually passing on to someone else and they lose time because what you produce has lower quality, so someone else has to clean it up. But there are also some studies that show, there are some productivity gains. I don't know how many percentage, but they're not very small, but they're not very big either. So give it a little bit more time, and then we can give you better answers probably. When it comes to the comparison with social media, and I remember that discussion, like the hype around social media and the potential of what was called Web 2.0 to improve democracy was huge. And now we saw something completely different. I think it says something about how difficult the impacts of technological change are to predict because of all difficult stuff like humans, and politics and economy. My biggest concern in that domain would actually be for science. I gave you a little bit of an optimistic take now here. And we will likely see very exciting science breakthroughs through these methods, for sure. But in parallel, these are methods that can produce junk science, poor science, that could erode people's trust to science. And that kind of longer term impact is more difficult to assess at this stage. But I see it in the horizon, that's a concern.
Happy with that? A small follow-up. I thought it was a follow-up at least. To Bosse, you talked about using large language model to convince people to not believe in conspiracy theories, but I guess they can also be used to make people believe in conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
So it's not clear to me it was just a good thing.
In that particular paper, it was a good thing. Mm-hmm. But then, of course, there are studies that show that you can tweak messaging and use the psychological profile of people to nudge them into changing opinions on different things. Those capacities are there. Yeah, those capacities are there.
Maybe that's going to be weeding out.
But it's a challenge to publish something like that, I think, for ethical reasons, probably.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Might be. Very good, very good. Okay, so yes.
Thank you. My name is Felicia Garcia. I work at Örebro University, and I work at the Center of Academic Development. So I'm from the pedagogical perspective. As an academic developer, my main area is sustainable development and equality. Wow. So I help our teachers on how to teach our students, regardless of subject, on these matters. And I was here a few weeks ago and I listened to a very interesting talk about AI and global health politics and why we should talk about it. And I left here with the question, who are we? And I think that I can't think of any of our faculty students that don't need to know something or a lot about this. So what are the consequences for higher education as a whole in creating a new generation? It's good that researchers talk about this, but our students who will be on top of things when most of us are retired, how do we get them informed and the big picture on a massive scale?
I don't know.
You can answer that, please.
I think the only thing I can say, and I think colleagues would agree, is that we're all struggling to make sense of this shift and how to make the best use of these tools, whether they can come tools for our education. And we have conflicting opinions with my colleagues even how to figure this out and do it properly. There are different positions. So one would be these tools are out there. People will use them, even though we might not like them to, or students. The best way to approach this is by teaching them how to use them in a good way. That's one position. But there's another position, and their academics are very strongly argue that we should not use these tools at all, because these models, large language models or generative AI, undermine the capacity of students to think and do what they're supposed to be learning at universities. And there are lots of ethical issues too, like these models were used copyrighted material, pirated material, they have a big carbon footprint, etc. So I don't have an answer. I know we're just also trying to figure this out internally.
We're trying to make it teaching content in all our subjects, but it's difficult.
That's good.
Thank you.
Yes, Daniel.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Victor. Very interesting. You spoke about how the AI companies are lobbying on the European Union, perhaps to soften some regulations around AI, but also sustainability regulations. I would like to ask the questions about the opposite forces, like the demand for regulations when it comes to sustainability on AI. I mean, AI companies and data centers, and you can. I mean, the way you responded to this, I think, was that, well, within EU, the regulations are kind of holistic. So any kind of energy user would need to be priced. The carbon will be priced on the emission trading system. But it seems to be, and that's my question. Are we seeing other demands for regulations? I mean, there are, when data centers are being established in some areas in the US, I've seen in Ireland, people are complaining that the energy prices are rising. These are not creating any employment locally. Are we seeing a trend where the demand for when these are not seen as good, but rather the ugly, do you think there will be like some kind of counter movement or asking for specific regulations that this is they're not very helpful when they consuming so much energy that the transition is even like stalled? Or you might have demands for regulating the use of AI when it comes to extraction of fossil fuel and so on. Is this wishful thinking, or do you think something is like this might be on the horizon?
No, I think it is. I think it is happening. I mean, first of all, there are always groups and research groups who are exploring this and challenging narratives about data centers, what they can do, etc., etc. So there's several groups that have popped up in the last year. But then there's also fierce local opposition. And that's not just in the US. You see it in Europe, you see it in South America, you see it in Ireland. And these are like local movements that demand stricter regulation, or that these data centers are not built at all. You know, so the question is, how big is this movement compared to where the political wind seems to be blowing lately, both in the US and in Europe, towards deregulation, focus on competitiveness, where AI is part of, drives competitiveness internationally. I would say those movements are very small in comparison to the bigger political movements we see. Yeah.
Comments?
Right, thanks. Maybe a follow-up. I mean, it seems, I don't know if this is also very small on the edge. It seems like it's being picked up by some of those like new left movements in the US, where people are talking about specific taxation on
maybe
that kind of,
maybe.
I don't know if
but I mean, it depends on what your comparison is, right? I mean, if you compare to the Biden era, which was much more focused on regulation, climate justice, etc., what we're seeing now as some sort of resistance is very, very small, very, very small compared to the Biden type of policy making. Yeah.
A short follow-up on that. Is it perhaps too simplistic way to see it? But the thing is that we are now conceiving of an AI race, and it's considered a security issue.
Yeah.
And as soon as things are considered a security issue, environmental restrictions just go out. That's basically it. Yeah?
I agree with you. I haven't looked into it, but I think that's like an underestimated dimension here. I think when countries design their AI national strategies, both here in the UK, in Canada, etc., like security dimensions of it are there. I think, and it's very basic. Like, we don't want the Chinese to dominate these very powerful technologies that you can weaponize. You know, we need our own stuff. So I think it's undercurrent to this, even though I haven't studied it. Yeah.
Thanks. Pontus, who was cited in the talk.
I was. So my name is Pontus Strimling. Thank you for the talk. It was lots of interesting stuff there. I'll follow Bo in having two short, unrelated questions. So first, you talked about how in the beginning when we were talking about accountability, it was all about mending the models, and now we're shifting towards talking about which models should be built. And my question is, do you know any examples of elected officials taking that question seriously? And then my second question is, no, I was suspecting that was the answer, but I was hoping for something else. But and the second question is, when we look at what AI does to all the recommendation systems and so on, it's a lot of advertisers built still. Is there any study of the environmental impact of the kind of consumptions that comes out of online advertisement compared to the consumption that people spend their money on otherwise? Like, is it because you buy packages from far away, it's more or less?
I haven't seen that. If you mean, and if you can particularly make a causal connection between recommender systems driving that extra consumption, or just in general?
We kind of know that they have to, right? So TikTok gets its money from its ads. It wouldn't be able to sustain itself if those ads weren't bringing in some kind of revenue to the companies that hold them, right? So we know that somehow we're shifting consumptions. Not is that consumption different from the consumption we do otherwise in energy, in effect on the environment?
I haven't seen it, Pontus, to be honest, but I haven't looked properly. And then to your first question, I mean, I gave you a very strong negative there, but and people feel free to disagree. But I think that the first versions of the EU AI Act was getting to a point where you at least kept track of these high-risk AI systems, right? And very high reporting demands and risk analysis, etc. So that would have been one way, at least, to discourage from developments of those technologies. But again, as you know, that's being negotiated, and people are arguing that it's being watered down, etc. So moving away from that scenario now.
Thank you.
Follow up, Daniel, or?
I was thinking of asking something.
But asking a new question or a follow up?
A new question.
Okay, so then we have to wait with you. You will get you. Pontus, were you happy with that? Then we go.
I'm very non-happy with that, but I'm satisfied with the answer.
I see. Andreas.
Okay, Victor, thank you very much for super interesting presentation here. I have two related questions.
Finally.
That's great. At last.
Well, and both of them are kind of big picture questions, which I thought were kind of apt to your presentation here. And the first one is, well, if you think about technological changes and what they've, throughout history and what they cause, there are two things that usually happens. One is that they create winners and losers, on a more longer time scale. And the other thing is that there's some sort of political or regulatory response. Usually you can think of the welfare state as response to the industrialization and so on. In this case, I have a hard time seeing any of those things happening. And the first one is, my first question is really, who are the winners and losers of this AI revolution in terms of large groups in society and so on? Who are the ones? Where are the tensions going to arise around what issues, right? And that doesn't necessarily have to confine itself to climate, but more generally. And my second question, which is kind of a follow-up to what Pontus and Daniel was asking, is, but I want to push that issue a little bit further. Is it reasonable to really think that we can regulate AI?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Is it really beyond the capacity of democratic governance? Especially since we know that democratic governance is not doing that very, very well at the moment, right?
All right.
I'm looking forward to that.
I mean, beginning with winners and losers of AI, that's when the concept is not very helpful, because you will need to break it up, I think, in different sectors. Like, who is going to be the winner of increased uses of AI in healthcare? Winners and losers. And what, like education. I think that it's going to depend on which sector you look at. For climate question. I mean, I dare to say something about climate change and climate issues. So far, what I've looked into, I think the losers are very clearly vulnerable communities around the world who are being affected by increased emissions or water use, etc. I think, and then the winners are going to be these companies, probably. I mean, I dare to say that. It could change. There's like no law, but you would need to be very sector specific, I think. And as we always like to say, it's an empirical question, Andreas. We will need to study that. The other question: can it be regulated? The governability question. Without having like full evidence, I think yes. And I think we don't think about how much we already today regulate different technologies in different ways, and there are ways that you can modify parts of technologies, again, like transport, like personal transporting systems, like shifting from single cars to metros or buses, etc. I mean, you can't stop transportation technologies, but you can make changes within them, right? And I think it's the same with AI technologies. I mean, I don't fully agree that the policy is always one step behind. I think policies shape technological development as well. You can discourage certain types of uses of technology, and you can encourage other types of technologies through investments and regulations and etc. So not fully governable, but you can direct. That would be my answer.
On that note, join me in thanking Victor for this very, very
Thanks for being here. Thank you.
informative talk. And we will start the next seminar as we ended this, because on November 19 we have Daniel Lindvall who's going to talk. Will democracy withstand the climate crisis? And Daniel is, of course, a researcher here at the Institute. November 26th, Natushka Lee, The Future of Life on Earth in the Universe, From Microbes to Human and Multiplanetary Species. And this is a micro and astrobiologist. That's the first time we have one astrobiologist at the Institute. And she is at the Swedish University of Agricultural Science. And then December 3rd, we have Olle Norheim, who's going to speak about something. He's from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And he's going to speak about, I think I got a message about that just coming in here. Yes, about halving premature deaths by 2050, ethical issues. You're very welcome then. Thank you.